Welcome to the Pandemic Files podcast, hosted by Dr. David Adnero. With each episode, we will be exploring the unprecedented public health response and those involved in it. More information can be found at thepandemicfiles.com. You can also subscribe on your favorite platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. I would like to welcome to the Pandemic Files podcast two of my favorite providers from the field hospital, Dr. Suma Ganta and physician assistant Rebecca Keenan. Suma is board certified in family medicine and was an undergraduate at Johns Hopkins before attending St. George's University, where she attained her medical degree. Rebecca graduated with a bachelor's degree from Miami University before going on and completing her physician assistant's degree from Anne Arundel. Both joined the COVID field hospital at the very beginning and were instrumental in developing the care and culture of this temporary organization.
What were you doing pre-pandemic, sort of setting it up? And how did you come to hear about the field hospital? How did you volunteer for it? And what did you think you were getting into?
Suma, I'll start and then we'll just take turns or whatever. So pre-pandemic, I was working two part-time jobs. So it ended up being a full job, but two separate places. I was training for the Boston Marathon because that was coming up. And, just living my life, a full, good life. And let's see. So before, how did I hear about this? So what was happening at work is my full-time, or one of my jobs, family practice, people weren't coming in. People didn't want to come in. We were open. We saw COVID positive. We had them in the office, or we'd go out to the cars. We were available, but people were not coming in for anything. So kind of seeing the writing on the wall, it was a very open relationship I had with my bosses. And I said, hey, why don't I go look to see if I can be somewhere else that's more useful? And docs were like, great. I was kind of like, do you know anything? Did you hear anything? I'm emailing people. I'm, getting contacts because I just want to do something. I ended up someone forwarded me the text. I can't remember the name of our agency, but someone who was non-medical forwarded me a text that said they were looking for people. So I ended up, talking to my bosses and I signed up. And I remember, Suma, the day that I signed up, I came into work. And I don't remember exactly how this happened, but you were like, I signed up too, or we were like right on the same page.
Yep.
And I think you were still working, but I think you were less busy, right? Just people weren't coming in.
Yeah, I think we kind of did this simultaneously, like within the same day or two. And Rebecca and I are colleagues, so it's kind of strange. Like we didn't really tell each other ahead of time. I remember getting a flyer in the fax machine, and I think maybe the flyers were sent out to every physician's office or hospital. I'm not sure how that went out, but I remember seeing this fax saying volunteers needed, I think, at field hospital. And I don't remember if it specifically said Secaucus at the time, but I think it had 3 sites that were listed, Secaucus, Atlantic City, and Edison. And I was thinking I wanted to go to Edison. It was closer to me, but I think Secaucus was opening first. I don't remember all the details, but yeah, Rebecca, she said this, and I literally had emailed that agency or whatever was how you were getting people recruited. And we did this both at the exact same time, weirdly enough, because no one was coming to the office, even though we were one of the few physicians' offices that were open to see patients in person. I know a lot of physicians started doing phone calls and remote or just closed up shop. And we literally were willing to see patients, but patients did not want to come see us in the offices because they were scared they were going to get COVID from our practices,
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure you would agree with this, Suma, that we wanted to be involved. Like we wanted to help. Like we have a skill set, and this is our crisis that we can help in. So for me, my biggest fear was I'd be sitting at home with nothing to do in a situation where I could help.
And we had the skills to help with something like this, where a lot of people, you're right, they didn't know what to do. And Rebecca and I both have the personalities, I think, that we would have gone crazy if we could not get out there and do something. I think we're similar in that sense.
And so what was the description of the field hospital, the field medical stations like?
Go ahead.
I think they said to take care of the overflow, to take care of the overflow from the hospitals. But I thought at first it said non-COVID patients. I'm not sure.
It definitely
said it was non-COVID or COVID. Do you remember?
It said non-COVID. And I remember very distinctly having this discussion with you saying, how can you not have COVID in the hospital?
Right.
We were like, it's
Right.
going to be COVID. I think everybody at orientation and everybody was like kind of looking at each other. We're like, we all know we're doing COVID, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe we can tell our moms we're doing non-COVID and they'll feel better.
Right.
There were, when Patty and I discussed this, there were some people who did show up and with the understanding that they would be taking care of non-COVID patients who then self-selected out. And an example of this was the convention center had a company that did their cleaning, and they had contracted to do the cleaning of the patient areas. And when they heard essentially 4 days before we were to open that we were likely going to be taking COVID positive patients, they pulled out. So we did not have a cleaning service up until about 2 days before we opened. And there were some other people who showed up and then said, nope, this is not for me. But I think most people were pretty realistic that, first of all, I think almost everybody knew that there weren't any non-COVID patients in hospitals pretty much, unless they were a stroke patient or on labor and delivery. And those weren't the things that were going to come to us.
Right.
So, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. So the two of you volunteer for this, work through a staffing agency. What did your families think? What were you preparing yourself for? What did you think this was going to look like when you got there?
You want to go back?
Sure. I had no idea what I was signing up for. I mean, I don't think anybody did, right? I don't think anyone had any idea what this was going to look like. And you have to have a frank discussion with your spouse, right? Which I'm like, okay. I very distinctly remember saying, this is what I want to do. I don't see how it can't be COVID. And my husband saying, where are you going to sleep? I was like, well, I'll be sleeping at home in our bed. He suggested a tent outside. I said, you may sleep in a tent outside. But when we get serious about that, and it is COVID, you realize you're taking a risk, but we weren't working 20 hours and sleeping for 4 hours. We had time to go home.
Sure.
So, but having that whole discussion and doing that whole thing where you're wiping down your feet before you leave, you're changing, you're putting it in the laundry bag, you're then throwing your laundry bag. I remember hopping in the shower with my glasses on, thinking, just that whole process. And my kids kind of looking, but not wanting to get anywhere near me, right? My family didn't even want to touch me. I mean, because they were afraid of me. And that was weird.
So did you end up isolating yourself in your house?
I did not.
Okay. So they ended up isolating you more than you isolated yourself?
Correct. And then it got better, as time went on.
Interesting. So Suma, how did your family react to this? I mean, you have a husband who's a physician. Your kids,
Yes.
were late teens at that point,
Yeah.
I think.
So I think 3 years back, my daughter was 16 and a half, 17, something like that. And school was closed and they started the Zoom stuff. So my family, my sister is a surgeon at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. If you remember, that was like the ground zero of COVID. And my brother-in-law is a surgeon at Bellevue in New York. And so my family was already in the midst of all of this. And I saw how they were kind of like jumping in, and they were expected to be ER physicians because there was really no surgeries going on. And so I already saw my family jumping in and doing this. So I thought, wow, I'm in the office. I'm not really seeing many patients in the office. I need to do something more as well. My husband was running around to all the radiology facilities, trying to make sure they have the proper PPE for anybody that needed to come in for studies. Obviously, nobody was coming in for routine mammograms and things like that, but they were coming in for chest x-rays or CTs, things like that. So I think I kind of felt a little bit like inferior. I have to step up over here. The rest of the family's taken off with this whole COVID crisis. Let me see how I can help, as well. So my husband was super supportive. My daughter as well was super supportive. I guess I really didn't ask anybody else because that was who was in my house, and everybody else was doing their share.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's how it happened.
Did you remain integrated physically in your household, or did you isolate?
We integrated. Honestly, I was being super careful. He was also, my husband, out there and, in the centers and the hospital too. So there's really, we would do what probably every other healthcare professional did. You stripped down in the laundry room and threw everything in the washer, and then ran up and scrubbed yourself, and then put everything through, hot water, and then you left your shoes out in the garage, and the things that we thought were saving us at the time, which they probably did, because I don't think any of us got COVID through that time.
Sure. It's interesting because the Adnero household, I stripped down, did all the normal stuff with my clothing and everything else, but I actually slept separately from the family from when I was home. So really, for the time period that the field hospital was operational, those 3 months, I think I was sleeping separately. I was also not home a lot. I mean, my hours were a little bit, I think, some of the longer hours of people. But yeah, I remember eating Easter dinner. Outside, it was a nice day, but I was 6 feet away from the family and the kids and everybody else. So it was an interesting experience to be physically isolated from everybody. And
was that your choice or your family?
I think it was more mine. At that point, I'm very nervous about bringing this back into the household. So yeah, it's interesting to think about now that people took different approaches depending on who they were or their family circumstances. So when you got there on orientation day, which it was, for everybody's understanding, we're talking about probably the first weekend in April, I think, is when we started bringing everybody in. It might have been a Friday or a Saturday, though days of the week didn't have a lot of meaning at that point, because I think the first patients came in that Wednesday, April 8th. So this is probably around April 2nd or 3rd. Well, what was your impression when you walked into the Meadowlands Expo and Convention Center that first time?
I felt like I was in the twilight zone. I mean, you're driving, there's nobody on the road. We were scrambling because I remember, and Suma, we were talking, do you have the right shoes with no openings? We were trying to dot our I's, cross the T's, follow all the directions. You couldn't get Croc, right? We were going to Walmart, borrowing from a friend, we were just trying to do everything right. I had a unique, I think, experience in that I was there day one and we didn't end up getting any patients. So I was there, we were setting up with the guard, which was really, really cool. Just seeing something go from nothing to resembling a healthcare facility, I guess, in a field hospital, let's just call it what it is. Yeah. Putting together equipment and being somewhat I guess disappointed there were no patients, but also feeling relieved. Okay, I get a little more time going through the carts, trying to understand where everything was. And I will never forget, I believe I was there that first night, and that first night was very memorable that we had patients to me. I will never forget that. I don't know if you'll remember that as well as I do. I think we had maybe 3 to 5 patients, and it was an interesting staff mix that night. And I didn't know you very well, and I will never forget. You said to me, "You're in charge. I am going to sleep tonight," and you were going to stay at a hotel very close by. Right. This was very early on, and I was like, "Oh shit!" It was terrifying, but what an awesome responsibility. And these patients were stable, but at night things feel different. They feel more intense. I didn't know anybody I was working with, and it's just, it was crazy. These big overhead lights. It felt like we were in a factory, but there were patients there.
Yeah, there were patients, and again, I think we've described this. This was pretty Spartan. Initially, each of these rooms essentially had some plastic sheeting around 3 walls. It had a curtain for a 4th. It was open overhead, so there's no ceiling essentially for them. Everybody had essentially an army cot without a mattress, a light, a small nightstand essentially, which Patty had made sure that we could get, and a light. And that, like a floor lamp. And that was everything that was in these rooms. And the nursing station was basically that. There were no computers. So it was chairs and long tables and paper charts. And that was it. That was pretty much the care area, with a lot of oxygen tanks and cylinders and porta potties down in another part of the area for the patients, and bathrooms like you would see in any convention center. So yeah, that was and the hotel you're referring to was literally right across the street. It was being used for a number of different things, for healthcare providers, and also for people who were not sick enough to need a hospital but couldn't go home and had to isolate. Some people who were experiencing homelessness, who were COVID positive and needed a place to stay. And I slept there probably the first 5 or 6 nights, because we didn't necessarily have anybody who had intubation experience at night or reliably. And so I slept there and then would come in and in the morning and start working. So now, Suma, what day did you start? If you weren't there on day one, when did you come into the field hospital?
Yeah, I came in for orientation like early in April, maybe April 5, 6, 7, something like that. I was there the day the first patient came in, so I think so that I remember, and everybody was there and so ready for that first patient, and everybody was so eager to help. I think it was just amazing. How the whole facility was just this ginormous campsite, indoor type of campsite with dividers, and just a crazy setup. How the Army guys just did their thing and had everything ready, And
it really, I think, because first of all, with the fact that the military was there, it did end a feel of a military field hospital or a MASH unit feeling about it, and also everybody was in 5 layers of PPE.
Right.
We were very fortunate that because the federal government was supporting this site, we had received a large shipment of N95 masks, gloves, surgical gowns, and ice shields. So we were fairly well, compared to a lot of hospitals, we were very well equipped. And we tried to be as conservative as possible, and people reuse. I'll never forget the rooms where we'd taken a couple of rooms and people would hang their essentially hang their gowns up so they could reuse them the next day, and they would have a brown paper bag that would have their N95 mask in it. I thought that was, and lots of people would leave their shoes next to that. They would change into whatever other shoes they were wearing when they were exiting.
Yep.
So what, Suma, from your point of view, when you first started taking care of the patients, right? So you're assigned some patients as they're coming in. What was the patient like? What were the patients like? What was the kind of the average patient there that you were taking care of?
So, I think most of the patients are from that area, the hospitals, either from UMDNJ or I think Jersey City or, from those areas. And so a lot of the patients were of different ethnicities, usually kind of like lower income backgrounds. And I think, it was tough because those patients, I think a lot of their family members would not come see them or didn't want to see them. And I don't remember exactly, but all the feelings that went through were like it felt like they were treated a little bit like they were pariahs because we did not know how to deal with COVID, and everybody wanted to avoid COVID patients, including your own family members. But I remember just feeling like it was so nice to be able to take care of them and treat them, and they had a place to go because they could not go home yet. They were not sick enough to be in an acute care hospital, but they were not well enough to go home yet. So this was a good safe space for them to get physically better until they were ready. I had done inpatient medicine for many, many years and just took a break for a few years prior to this, but it was fulfilling to get back into that type of care to bring a patient up to speed, I think, So, and it was so nice to meet everybody from different walks of life. I hadn't worked with, I guess, we had orthopedic surgeons there. We had bariatric surgeons there. We had physician assistants. We had nurse practitioners. I hadn't worked with a team or a group of people like that, in a long time, being in private practice for the past many years, actually. So it was very fulfilling to work as a group to help the patients, I think.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of the staff, everybody who goes through medicine or nursing or, being a provider or a nurse has some inpatient experience, but a lot of the people were not working in inpatient environments. Even the surgeons, a lot of them had been more oriented to outpatient medicine. A lot of our nurses were, quite frankly, thinking about the fact that schools were closed. We got a number of school nurses who came in to work as RNs. We also had a number of nurses who normally would be in outpatient surgery centers. So it had been a while since they had been in an inpatient setting of any type. And I'm sure you both would agree with this, I was amazed by how debilitated the average patient was.
Right.
The average patient was probably about 50 to 60 years old, had some underlying medical conditions, some hypertension, some diabetes, but, would generally be considered fairly healthy normally. And they looked like they had just gotten out of 6 months in the hospital. A lot of them needed physical therapy. They didn't need much oxygen requirements, but the oxygen they really needed. They did not do well without that 1 to 3 liters of oxygen per minute they were getting. I was amazed by how debilitated they were, and also how quickly they began to recover once they were able to get, some regular, basic care, to be honest with you.
We had a great group of, I think, respiratory therapists and physical therapists that were there. And, and to this day, I'm friendly with some of the therapists. Froylan, who's I'm not sure if you stayed in touch with, amazing respiratory therapists. It's an amazing group of respiratory therapists and physical therapists that were there. And they really did some very aggressive physical therapy to get the patients up to speed. I had met Froylan there, and he continued to go on to the next phase into East Orange with all of us too. And they just did an amazing job. I learned a lot about, oxygen. I learned a lot about things I haven't, I needed to learn about. So it was nice. Everybody helped everybody, and we all taught each other, various skills, I guess.
Yeah. And, I was spending most of my time in the command center area away from patient care. And I would definitely get into where the patients were, and sometimes I would get to do some direct patient care, but not a lot of it. But what I noticed, and Rebecca, I don't know if you'd like to comment on this, is the skeleton structure that was created by, the military that was setting this up, and the all-hazard incident management team, which were the state police driven folks who were really making a lot of the decisions about what would be in there before we got in there. The stuff that Patty and I were doing to sketch out what the priorities would be, what patients we would accept, the orientation. But I noticed after a few days that the place began to take on a life and a culture of its own.
So every day you come in and we would gather at that table so you enter, and this was one of the craziest things. It says there was that sign, you're now entering the hot zone. And the entire field hospital is a hot zone, right? But it was a sobering reminder, like tighten up your mask, double, triple check all your things. So as soon as you entered the hot zone, there was a table where all the providers would gather. The nurses, the therapists all gathered in their own places. And we kind of had that changing of the guards. And you had that whiteboard, and we'd be like, what are we doing differently today? And it was always evolving. And one of the things that I loved is you were always in command center, and Patty, and you would come out, or when we would come out, you would talk to us and you would say, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you see that's going on out there? What's working? What isn't working? So we were constantly changing things. If I had a day off or 2 days off, I was like, how do we do things now? It was completely different, but always the changes were good. I would say 99%. If they weren't, we'd go back the other way. So I felt very valued in that it wasn't set in stone the way we were doing things. It was, we were doing whatever was the best way to care for the patients, and everybody's opinion was valued.
Yeah, and I don't know how you two sort of experienced this, but the other thing I experienced was that there was, medicine is very hierarchical. There's a lot of authority gradients that we talk about, and I think the field hospital experience was the flattest gradient of authority I've ever worked in.
Oh, that was the best part. We were stripped down. I had a patient with a wound. I would walk around. I don't know wounds. I had never written a hospital order in my life. I didn't know how to write an order, right? But it was okay. It was all fine. Who knows wounds? Susie knows wounds. Go talk to Susie. Where's Susie? Was it a letter or a number that day? I don't remember how we were delineating. She's in J. Okay. It was in, remember, an orthopedic surgeon. I need to write an insulin sliding scale. I'm like, I gotcha. But it didn't. There's a derm PA here. There's a this. Right. There's a that. It doesn't matter. I had a nurse who was working inpatient COVID. Tell me what did you learn today at work? Tell me how to help. That was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I agree.
I had a nurse.
Go ahead.
It certainly leveled the playing field for sure, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, everything changed so quickly. It was interesting. I would be getting information from people who were in hospitals and hearing what they were talking about. I was witnessing the evolutions that, Rebecca, you're referring to within the hot zone itself, taking kind of a life of its own and developing the culture and the approach, which usually takes decades to do and weeks and months to work out, seem to happen in days. And the constant evolution of, okay, we're doing this a little bit differently, we're going to try doing this, was always so impressive. And, when anybody had an idea, we tried it. There was, and Patty, I think, said this when I was talking to her in the first episode, there was no ego about anything. None of us were an expert on COVID. Whoever had a good idea was going to win out, and we were going to try anything and everything. And I was always impressed that people kept coming back every day.
I think
into chaos.
You had everybody that wanted to be there. Nobody was being forced to be there, and I think that's what helped. Everybody wanted to help. Everybody wanted to do something. COVID was new to everyone, so no one really could have an ego. It's all, let's all work together to try to see how we could move forward type of mentality, Now,
what I have to say that, and it worked out great, and I'm still I consider myself very close friends with a number of the folks from the New Jersey National Guard. But there was a little bit of a culture difference between, even though the National Guard members who were medical personnel spend most of their time in civilian clothing at civilian jobs, they were at that point active duty military with a hierarchy and a structure and a way and a culture of approaching problems, which is different than, I think, how civilians approach problems at times. And that led to some normal friction sort of on the command level and the leadership side. What was it like, as you're taking care of patients in the hot zone, integrating with the military folks?
For me, go ahead, Suma.
I mean, I had never worked with military personnel ever in my life, so I didn't know what to expect. I think I was a little bit scared initially. I wasn't sure what my place was or who was commanding or who was. So you didn't really. There was no hierarchy. No, like you said, no structure where you're top and you're bottom. So everybody kind of had to find their own niche in there. But I think everybody had their strengths. They're very good at getting things done and the organization the way they did it. And then we're the clinical side. So I think everybody had their place in their role.
I agree. Yeah. Rebecca?
Anytime you ask someone in uniform, do you know where this is? Or do we have, I gotcha. I'm going to find it. I'm going to get back to you. It was like the best. They can't say no. I don't know if that's their rule, but no, they never said no. I will find it. I'll get back to you. I don't know, ma'am. Like, it was just awesome.
Yeah, I think they had, their leadership, both on site and off site, had made it very clear to them that their role was to support the civilian hospitals. And so these were not military hospitals, they were civilian, and that they should, find their niche, find their active role, take it on, and do everything they could to be supportive. And that attitude of, I will find out whatever I need to find out to accomplish this was really important. And Sumit, you talked about what it was like going from essentially being in an open air camp setting to now being in something that was basically once a hospital, not an acute care hospital, but it was a rehab hospital. And it had doors and ceilings and nursing stations and elevators and, bathrooms.
I guess, that's more what I was used to with my training. So it was a little bit, honestly, like I liked being in the field hospital. It felt like you were closer to the patients that, there, closer to your staff there. And then when you get back into this, building, like you said, with doors and walls and bathrooms, it, more traditional hospital environment. And in some ways it was easier, having that environment. I'm sure the patients appreciated that much better, being in real hospital rooms. We had nurses stations again, and dedicated areas again for clinical staff and patients. But it was a little bit sad, I think, when we left field hospital. I was a little bit sad when I know we had made some strides though, and that was a good thing that we went to East Orange. But yeah, it's that uniqueness of the field hospital is what made it special, to work there.
Yes. I agree. I still think the camaraderie existed, and that kind of lower authority gradients. But I do think it changed once we got into a more traditional setting, without a doubt. So Rebecca, you worked a lot. Did you work exclusively nights, or you worked at just
I worked
a number
whenever.
of nights?
I just worked whenever.
Got it. So what was it? Because I remember about knowing that I had to start getting some sleep in my actual house and seeing my family. I got I requested from University Hospital EMS to provide us a EMT and a paramedic at nights to have some support for medical emergencies, and particularly anything around an airway emergency, if there was an intubation, et cetera, which enabled me to be able to go home. What was it? And my perception is that I feel like having that crew there lowered the temperature, the anxiety level, I think, on night shifts a little bit.
100%.
A little bit, yeah.
Walking in and seeing a medic, I was like, oh my God. Nights just had a different feeling. And it's like, if people are going to tank, they're going to tank at night. Yep. I remember when we got the lamps and we had a system, because you would have a little less staff at night, right? You don't have to do as much at night. And one night, it's like thinking on the fly, and I can't remember the physician's name. He worked probably exclusively nights. We came up with an idea of let's leave the lamp on outside of the room if the patient, we're worried about the patient. Like something you do when you hand off patients. You would star on that piece of paper, watch this one. Well, at night, especially if I was working, we used to call it the outside, and then I came and worked on the inside. So I might have worked 8 hours on the outside, and then I'm coming and I'm working overnight, and I know my limits. I say, hey, tap somebody on the shoulder. I am going to go get vertical for 45 minutes. I'm going to have my walkie-talkie on. I checked all my people. The lights are on. They're like, cool. I'm going to pace around the entire time. It's not vertical, horizontal. I'm like just getting my feet up. We would lay on chairs in the lobby, whatever we could do. And then we'd watch each other. And then I'd be like, okay, 2 to 4 a.m. I'm good. I would just pace up and down the rooms, go on the rooms that the patients had the light on. And we had no monitors. How did we check our patients were okay? We would go in, feel them, because a lot of them were prone. We would put their hand on their back. And that's surreal to think of in modern medicine. That's how we're watching our patients, right? But it was never, I did this, you do that. It was just like, this is where I am. I remember this one specific physician. He was a machine. He's like, I don't break. I don't need rest. I'm like, thank you. Fantastic. I do. I'm taking 45. Can you watch mine? And we would. And it didn't matter. Like, nobody's watching when you're taking breaks or doing this, but we all just kind of grouped together. Or in the respiratory therapist, the nurse, everybody.
Yeah. Again, I think that sense of adventure and the people who stayed. And again, there are a lot of people who self-selected out, showed up, worked a shift or two, and then didn't come back. Not so much on the provider side, a little bit more on the nursing side to a certain extent, but a few doctors and other providers. But that sense of this is the place I want to be, and I want to be part of this, and the open-mindedness. It's rare, quite frankly, with providers and particularly physicians to not have resistance to new ideas or changes in things. And this changed constantly. And I was so impressed by just everybody was happy. I came out of the field hospital feeling very energized and a little tired and very happy. And it was interesting that's kind of the universal way people talk about it.
And when you say that, like, we volunteered, I didn't know I was getting paid. I'm sure you didn't either, Suma. They were looking for volunteers. The word volunteer means something different. We wanted to help. Right. And it was nice to make money, sure, but I think you would have had 95% of the same people show up without money.
Correct. I remember when they asked me if I wanted to be the CMO of this facility. First of all, I don't think they got the word CMO out when I said yes. And Maria Christensen, who I'd known a long time, said, well, don't you want to know what the job is? I'm like, it doesn't matter. You could tell me you want me to sweep the floors. I couldn't be at home. Over my dead body, was I going to be sitting at home while everybody else was participating in this, once in a lifetime medical disaster?
Yeah, I don't think anybody jumped into this for money. No. It was because of excitement, or because it was a challenge, or because it was a willingness to help. I think so many other reasons why people did this.
Yeah, and again, so reflecting what you were talking about, we got to spend a lot of time with the patients, and we got to see people who didn't have a lot of options. A number some were homeless, some came from families that they didn't have a place that they could easily go and isolate. Many were English was not their first language. A lot were underinsured, and none of that mattered. Everybody got taken care of the same, and you could see the improvements in them day to day in ways that you don't always get to see. And we also had no pressures to discharge patients. So you could keep a patient for an extra day or two if you had to. Yeah. And we had
the gratefulness. They were grateful, and I think just working with that particular subset of patients, they I don't know, it was nice to get that appreciation. I think you don't get it every day in medicine.
No, you don't. And again, I was so, everybody contributed something. I remember when this guy named George shows up, like 5 or 6, and he's ex-military, and I think he was a LPN maybe, but he had a talent for logistics. So suddenly he's in charge of our supply room. And next thing we know, everything's organized. He's keeping track of everything. He's running it. He ended up working with the Department of Health on the testing program for months. The young ladies who were our registration folks, because we did do registration by computer. That was the only thing we did. Admission, discharge, and transfers were done by computer. I remember them, one of them procured ice cream and all the fixings, because she had her previous job, she worked for a event company, and we had an ice cream sundae day, and myself and the colonel from the National Guard were scooping ice cream for people, and then they had that tree that had the count of how many patients we had discharged and how many had been admitted. and then everybody else and all of our names on it. And it was just, I was so thoroughly impressed. It felt halfway between like a heist movie like Ocean's 11 and one of those old Andy Rooney movies where they're putting on a show in the barn and they all just kind of chip in because we didn't have stuff. We didn't have anything. So, you got to put your individual footprint on that place every day you went to work. And had and everyone would have a huge impact on what we would do the next day, which is very rare. Again, very rare in medicine to have that kind of impact, not just on the patients, but on your work environment on a daily basis.
I remember the day we had a discharge. I think the 250th patient from Meadowlands. What a great feat that was, and that was only within I don't know a few weeks that we were there, and it's amazing. I mean, like we had taken care. Yeah. I don't know in the end what the total was. I just remember that number and that day.
Yeah, and I have to say that if you. I was primarily, and then one of the paramedics, Rebecca Taylor, started doing it. But talking to the chief nursing officers, the chief medical officers of the acute care hospitals, talking to their care managers, in terms of as we were evaluating people to be transferred to us, every little bit helped. If you could take 6 patients out of University Hospital in Newark, or even 3 patients out of Christ Hospital in Jersey City, that's 3 more patients who were then able to get out of the ICU and go into another floor. And then that was 3 fewer patients in the ER. And it was the sense that this was incredibly important, even if it wasn't thousands of patients. It was making a huge difference in giving some breathing space to these hospitals, and they were grateful for anything and everything. And I also, occasionally we would take some patients that kind of stretched the ability of our resources, not the people so much, but the resources we would have. I mean, again, we had X-ray we could call in, but it would take an hour or 2. Blood work would take a day to come back if we were lucky. We had a pretty good pharmacy, and we had, obviously IV and oral medications, et cetera. But, we didn't have a CAT scanner. We didn't have stat blood work other than blood sugars, I think. And so, trying to find the right patients, but also trying to find a reason to say yes to the patient rather than finding reasons not to take the patient was very important. And I know that the folks at the hospitals, when I was talking to them, really appreciated our willingness to be flexible and work with them on patients.
Yeah, I'm sure we helped decompress quite a bit.
No doubt about it. So we have a few more minutes left. So I guess the thing I want to turn to, we've kind of talked about culture a lot in this, but the clearly this for everybody was stepping out of our comfort zones, either in terms of our specialty for some people or in terms of working with the military or being in a very austere environment. What was that like for the two of you? What do you think about when you kind of look at that moving outside your comfort zones?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. It was very challenging. It was mentally and physically taxing, exhausting, but it was probably one of the most rewarding things I have ever done in my career. Maybe it will be the most rewarding thing I will do in my career. I'm not sure. But it was a time that I'm proud that I was able to help in my small way, and my teenage daughter was proud, and that doesn't happen often. So that was. So that's a plus, but I think it was it's a great team of professionals that came together to serve a purpose, and I don't know, it was truly one of the most amazing experiences, I think, for me.
Absolutely.
So I think we've talked about some of the differences and we talked about the fact that this was a very flat environment in terms of authority gradients, but obviously there was leadership happening all the time. Providers are leaders just in our interactions with patients and families and nurses, etc. What did you see in terms of leadership that you think about and reflect worked incredibly well, or that you wish you would see kind of in our normal lives?
So David, one of the things you said, I think you said this in your first podcast, you said, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Something in regards to that, and I'm aware. So that was something that I don't think we ever felt like we couldn't come to you.
Right.
So, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. I think maybe we should do that. So when I look at being a leader, that when you say I'm not the smartest guy in the room, I think a good leader asks questions, is open to feedback. And I think as providers, physicians, we get kind of stuck in our way. I know this is how I do it. Well, you know what? Maybe we don't. Maybe we need to listen a little better. I think that's something you taught me, that, hey, if a nurse has an intuition about something, listen.
Yep. Yeah, I think what I've said is that I am rare. I used to say I'm never the smartest person in the room, and I've kind of changed it to I am never the most knowledgeable person on anything that we're talking about. And with the exception of emergency medicine, I am not an expert on anything. And so the need to draw from the experiences and the knowledge and the innovation of your team is essential. And you have to be comfortable not knowing everything, and to take the burden of trying to know everything just grinds you down also. And I love collaborative environments. And so this was, for me, one of the best experiences I had. I think I also said in one of the other episodes, I don't think I ever gave any orders ever. I didn't have to. People just took whatever we said we were going to do and ran with it. And that was the environment I enjoyed the most. Suma, you'd obviously been both in hospital medicine and in primary care and outpatient medicine. What was kind of your experience looking at this from a leadership point of view?
I think obviously when you're doing residency, you're a physician at that point, but any resident knows you're kind of low on the totem pole. You come in and, like everyone from nursing to therapy to orderlies are above you. They all know more than you do because you're the person there. Mm-hmm. And then later on, you become the leader. You're the physician. So you kind of take on a little bit higher in the hierarchy. So this was kind of, I guess, going to somewhere in the middle, like everybody kind of came together to treat something new. There really was no hierarchy. You kind of established your own order once you started here, which I liked. I had a lot of people like Maria was an awesome charge nurse. I worked with her quite a bit. She taught me a lot. Angela, she was one of the aides, and I don't speak Spanish. She went into the patient rooms with me and she translated for me. And I learned a lot about like culture and just how people, spoke to her. And she had to translate for me. It was just a nice community of people working together, professionals working together. So I don't think anybody kind of felt like that they were a leader. I think we all did the job together.
Pretty nice. And then I think we have a few more minutes. I've tended to ask these questions at the end. I think we've covered the one about how do you feel about your time in the field hospital pretty well. But this other question, I'd like to see if you all have different thoughts. What impact did doing this have on you? Like, looking back, other than clearly being very proud of it, has it had an impact on how you approach either your professional life or your personal life or what you're engaged in now?
I think it helped me get a good perspective. So you're in the hospital, you're seeing people who are down and out. I don't know how else to say it. Living a very different life than the privileged life that I lead. And I'm getting an email from my kid's teacher. They didn't show up for band. It helped me learn perspective and trying to, normally I would have been calling my kids or hounding my husband who's home working while he's taking care of my kids. They were 10, 12, and 14, all doing remote learning. I was like, I don't care about band. Just don't care. Not important. Not even going to care about that. What's big picture? What's important here? Are my kids happy? Are they fed? Are my patients taken care of? And I felt like I don't know what the right word is, but I guess I got a bigger dose of perspective than I was used to getting in my real life, where I would have come down on my kids for, you were 5 minutes late for this, you didn't turn in this paper. I was like, I really don't care. What's important is the big picture. And I felt like during the pandemic, a lot of us got a good dose of perspective.
Nicely put. Suma, any thoughts on this as you're reflecting back today?
I think it definitely got me out of my comfort zone. Just being in private practice for a while, you get used to a little bit more of like the routine sort of what you're taking care of. So just professionally, personally, I'm glad I did it. I'm not sure if I would do it again, but I think. But it was a very exciting time in my life. And you're right, like Rebecca said, I think everybody knows that, this is your health, this is the most important thing, should be the most important thing, and everything else kind of should go by the wayside or falls in line after this. So it definitely puts things in perspective for sure.
Absolutely. And then the last question that I like to ask, or the last statement, because I always think that I should be willing to answer questions just like I ask them. So do either of you have any final thoughts, or do you have any questions that you're dying to ask me before we wrap up?
I've got a dual question for you, David. Would you do it again?
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Same question I had.
Okay. But here's my
Absolutely.
follow-up, because I knew you would say that. What would you do differently?
I don't think I would do anything. I don't think I would do anything from the field hospital point of view. I would do anything differently. I would, if tomorrow they needed me to go and work at a field hospital for another pandemic, I would say yes immediately, and I would do any position related to it. Now, honestly, you can't necessarily recreate, what you had before, because it was the right team, the right people, the right place. But there's nothing I would want to change, and there was nothing I would not hesitate for a second to do it. Suma, much like what you were talking about, this is one of the highlights of my life. And part of the problem for me is I don't think I'm ever going to be able to recreate that environment from a leadership point of view in any other job that I will have. And that's part of the problem, is everything kind of compares to that very much. So, yeah, I would. I have no regrets saying yes. I would say yes in a heartbeat, as long as I can just do some clinical care. No problem. The second part was, what would I do differently? Nothing. I think I would try to find a way just to understand how limiting time-wise it is, so you can just have a moment to gather everybody up and thank them before they all break up and move on. That's the only thing I would try to do differently, because it ends too quickly. Mm-hmm. And you don't get that, not so much closure, but you don't get that opportunity just to say thank you and share how amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, both of you. I mean, I get to have you two in my life, and I, you are both very special to me, and as are the other people that we work closely with. I get to see your pictures on Facebook and talk to you all occasionally, and Rebecca, you and I did some other stuff later on in the pandemic that was kind of fun, and it's just I love having these people in my life, because you all are so impressive. I don't think you understand how impressed I am with what you all did.
I think it's the other way, David. I think it's been an honor working, alongside you and meeting you and maintaining a relationship with you and all the people that we were fortunate to work with. But I don't think this would have proceeded as well as it did if it wasn't for you, taking the reins, for sure.
I appreciate that. But I'm so impressed. I'm always, I just am so impressed with what people did, and just the adventurous approach they took to doing it. I will always be thinking about the teams that we had.
When you have a good leader, it makes it easy.
Thank you for joining us for the Pandemic Files, produced and copyrighted by Griffin Medical LLC. For more information, please visit our website on thepandemicfiles.com.